My name is Raymond Douglas Chong, and from Texas, I'll say, how y'all? So this story is my odyssey between two worlds, between Cathay and Gum Sum. Gum Sum, Gold Mountain. Specifically, Bein Yiu Chung, my great-great-grandfather. And we're ancestors, my forefathers, were from Hoyping, near Toisan, near Sze Yup, near Kwangtung. This place is my roots in Hoyping, from Gong, the village of Dragon Hill, where my forefathers from China came to Gold Mountain since 1849. But the story now is focusing on Bein Yiu Chung, my great-great-grandfather from Hoyping. We came from a poor village, just farming. He was gathering firewood in the village. He got a little bill, say, come to Gold Mountain. And he talked to his father and came around 1865. And he was there from 1865 to 1869. We call it the Hell on Wheels, with the Army of Canton, the 12,000 soldiers of the Army of Canton. And he cut through 15 tunnels with his brothers, the awesome emerald, granite, silver Nevada. He went through the Great Basin Desert in the heat of the summer. So they built the railroad through the mountains, through the valleys and hills and the deserts over the 4-year period. And this is, of course, the famous day of the Golden Spike, May 10th, 1869. And in this illustration, there are Chinese who are laying the final tracks on that day. After that completion, my Bein Yiu Chung went back to Gong in Hoyping to his wife and son, who was my great-grandfather at that time. But the story does not end here. It extends afterwards, many generations. So this Transcontinental Railroad was the works of giants. But from there is the legacy of our ancestors, from us, our descendants now, here in America, Gold Mountain. The subsequent generations I will cover are my ancestors, or my forefathers. And this gentleman is Bein Yiu Chung, the great-grandfather of mine, and in 1892, with his cousin, he arrived in Boston Chinatown. And Chinatown was your typical ghetto where all the Chinese were trapped, or in New York City, same thing. And they had the traditional ceremonies like Chinese New Year, the dragon dance, things of that nature. And Chinatown was a lively place for my Bein Yiu Chung because he was not just a laborer or a laundryman. He was a merchant in the trade of gambling and opium. So he was a very successful entrepreneur in Boston Chinatown up to 1926 when he went back to Hoyping. Subsequently, my grandfather, Moi Chung, Generation 4, he was born also in the village in Hoyping, in Guangdong. He was the next generation that came to America. And as we all know about the Chinese Exclusion Act, my forefathers could not bring their women, their families, to Gold Mountain. We were trapped in a bachelor society in our Chinatown. So in 1912, on the SS Mongolia, my grandfather, Moi Chung, arrived on the Angel Island immigration station in 1912. The first year it was open, he arrived there and got processed. From there, he went to Boston, Chinatown, worked a couple years. Then, because of his wealth of his father, he got an interest in the Chinatown at the Royal Restaurant, making chop suey, which is the Cantonese cuisine of the Chinese at that time, chop suey. So he was there for a couple of years. And then eventually, in 1923 to 1936, he went to Central Square in Cambridge. And Central Square was Main Street downtown in Cambridge during that era. We got merchants, shops, schools, entertainment. And this is the image. You see the sign? Chop Suey. He had a restaurant, a first-class restaurant, for the clientele from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Harvard University. So he broke the tie from Chinatown, went to the next level, to the mainstream America. Eventually, the Great Depression was so bad, he decided to move with my father to Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. And he stayed at this place called the Yuk Kong Lo Chop Suey Cafe in Little Tokyo on the second floor. And it's typical for most Chinese, we were very frugal. So they slept in the back room on piles of newspapers, not your comfortable mattress pad, but on piles of newspapers. So they lived there for a while with some cousins from the village. And I'll share a story of one consequence of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Because of that act, my grandfather was separated from my grandmother, Moi Chung, to Qisheng Huang. From 1923 to 1966. 43 years of separation, no internet, no telephone, no communication, some sporadic letters. When my grandfather left the village at that time, she was a young mother for a 2-year-old son, my father. Fast forward 43 years later, they reunited. After love came my father, Jim Suyi Chung, the 5th generation on Gold Mountain. And he too was born in the village of Dragon Hill in Hoyping. And again, as part of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he came in as a paper son to Hong Kong Chung in 1932. His life, when he came to America, Gold Mountain, was pretty lively. He went to San Francisco Chinatown at the age of roughly 20, 21. My father, from 1943 to 1945, was part of the Chinese crew with Pan American Airways, the China Clipper, stationed on Treasure Island in San Francisco, and later in Pearl City in Honolulu. Later on, my father became part of a nightclub operation called the Kubakan Theater Restaurant at the gateway of Chinatown in San Francisco. Later on, my father went to Los Angeles Chinatown, and that was New Chinatown in the heart of Los Angeles near City Hall, off of Broadway and Hill Street. He later became a mechanic for Lockheed Aircraft Company in Burbank, stayed there from 1950 to 1979. He was what I call an inspector of aircraft. But also, again, the tie, he was a weekend waiter at the famous Far East Cafe in Little Tokyo, East First Street. And you can see the Japanese and the Chinese blending it together, just like the Chinese and Irish, in a way. And he married my mom, Siyi Tong, actually a Yu. It was a matchmaking arrangement. And that's me. Fast forward a year later, I popped up. And you can see my dad was very happy. And this is just before my father died in 1979. You can see his love for my mom. And there's me, fast forward, generation 6. Raymond Douglas Chong. And my world was New Chinatown in Los Angeles. I can remember the beef wonton, the roast duck, the sweet and sour pork at the Hong Kong Low. My life, different things, different interests. I was the chair of the Miss Oakland Chinatown pageant, the first one in 1988. Fantastic moment. Another venture was helping the community, helping the Vietnamese, the Chinese, Cambodians in tutoring with the Oakland Asian Student Educational Services from 1990 to 2000. I was president at the time. And then in Texas, I was the founder and president of the Texas chapter of the International Chinese Transportation Professional Association. And now, forthcoming is Generation 7, Kinji Kao Chong, who is a budding filmmaker at the University of Texas, Austin. So his path, I let him decide what he wanted to do, follow his dream. This is the picture at the moment in November 2007 when I returned to Yolongo, the land of the Dai Law, the castle in the sky. And it was a total utter surprise because we didn't tell them we were going to show up. We just drove into the plaza, jumped out, and said, we're here. We surprised them, but then they surprised me. They were saying, we've been waiting for you for 75 years. And they led me to my house, my ancestor home. You see this gentleman? These 5 men were the classmates of my father when he left in 1932. To your right is the moment when I realized the villagers accepted me as a fallen leaf, a returning son to Yonglungun. That scene is my Qingming back in May of 2017. And what was shown are the tombs of my ancestors. There are 7 tombs of 5 generations dating back to my great-great-great-grandfather, including Bein Yiu Chung, the Transcontinental Railroad. This is my physical evidence, a trace, reality, my tie to the Transcontinental Railroad. And looking back at that moment, even now, to think of their sacrifices, their struggles of my forefathers before me on Gold Mountain. This is my roots, and I want to extend that tradition now to myself, but most importantly, to the 7th generation, Kinji Kao Chong, to fulfill our dreams on our Gold Mountain. Thank you.